Coffee time again, exposing the truth. Welcome to Coffee Time Again, exposing the truth. Dale at the microphone, the show that demonstrates how history repeats itself. He digs into the past, shows what happens, and how it is happening now. Follow the path of history to where it goes, then relate it to today to reveal the connections. The culture that forgets its history has no future. A history buff and loves to talk about it, going back as far as ancient Greeks and Egyptians and beyond. So grab your coffee, your chair, and listen to the show. Hope you enjoy.
Good morning, United States of America. We're in a state of chaos as usual, and I hope to get it straightened up. And the world's in worse shape than we are, so let's get it to go together, world. And that includes the United States as well. So welcome to this. This show is the Coffee Time Again, where we expose the truth. And today we're exposing the truth of Nadler, Evan Nadler, MB, MBA. He is an expert on child obesity, and that's what we're going to be talking about this morning while we're here, and probably a couple other subjects as they come up. So let me introduce Evan to you, and welcome to the show, Evan, and tell us about yourself.
Thanks so much, Dale, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm a pediatric surgeon by training, but about 25 years ago, I got interested in childhood obesity and ended up dedicating my academic career to that topic. And before I started doing all this, which is somewhat patient advocacy work and trying to just educate the masses about childhood obesity and obesity in general, I was the busiest pediatric bariatric surgeon, meaning I was doing bariatric surgery on kids, and I was doing that for about 20 years now, and was the busiest guy in the country. And so I learned a lot, but then decided it was time to try to take what I've learned and not just disseminate that information to medical folks or providers or other docs and professionals, but to try to take the message actually directly to the masses, directly to the people, because that's really who needs to know about it, so that people can advocate for themselves and try to get the care they need. So that's why I'm here, and happy to talk about that and how we can help sort of just make the world a better place, which sounds sappy, but that's really what we're trying to do.
Well, that's what may sound sappy, but it's definitely something I've been trying to do. I did a podcast on human trafficking here a while back, and I did the analytics on it and was checking it out, and nobody was listening to it. So I got mad, and I wrote a long article chewing out the world and America's particularly about being apathetic. Nobody read it. That's not a joke either.
Yeah, no, I know. It's unfortunate, but I can tell you, so when people ask me why they should care about childhood obesity, let's say they don't have obesity themselves, or they don't have a kid who has obesity, don't know anyone with obesity. They ask me why they should care, why they should listen. And I tell them because it's costing our federal government a ton of money treating these kids and treating adults with obesity. And that ends up coming out of your wallet as a taxpayer. So even if you don't care, even if you don't have any empathy for these people, even if you don't care about what happens to your fellow man or woman or person, you should care because it affects your wallet. It affects your bottom line. And unfortunately, that's what attracts a lot of people. Like, that's what matters most to a lot of people, which isn't the greatest thing to talk about, but it's reality. So so I'm hoping that people will listen to this episode, even if they don't necessarily, if obesity hasn't touched them personally, but they're listening because they know that it's just, it makes up such a huge amount of our federal expenditures for healthcare, just dealing with obesity and its complications, and that all starts in childhood.
Okay, that starts with the parents.
Well, that's an interesting question because actually today, coincidentally, there was a article published in The Lancet that actually showed that parents and parenting had no impact on the prevention of childhood obesity up until they only studied it to like 2 years of life or something like that. Um, so I think so. One of the things I've learned over the years is that yes, there's a component of nurture of the environment and not eating healthy and not exercising as much as anyone should is certainly a healthcare issue worth pursuing. And that's true whether you have obesity or not. But when it comes to childhood obesity, the impact of your genetics, your epigenetics, which is how the environment interacts with your genes, and your prenatal environment, so meaning what you're exposed to as a developing fetus inside your mom, actually have a whole lot more to do with your risk of developing obesity than your parents do after you're born. So, yes, it does come down to the parents, but not necessarily in the way most people think about it.
That's very interesting. I had not realized that that would be such an important part of childhood obesity would be prenatal care and
Yeah. So there was actually a study, I guess maybe like a month ago, that showed when all the hubbub was in the media about autism and what causes autism. There was actually a study that showed that prenatal, the mom having diabetes, whether it was gestational diabetes or diabetes she developed during pregnancy or diabetes she had before pregnancy, uh, babies born to moms with diabetes had about a 20% increased risk of having autism, which no one had ever identified as a risk factor before. So there's a whole lot that we don't really understand about the in utero environment and how it impacts babies. But in terms of obesity, we do know it has a huge impact. And it's like the number one risk factor. Having a parent that has obesity or having a mom that has obesity during pregnancy ends up being the number one risk factor for obesity in that child. And it's probably due to a lot of different things, but in part it's due to the genetics of the disease.
Yeah, I didn't know they did bariatric surgery on children. However, that wasn't surprised me when you said that. I
Yeah,
thought it in adults, but I didn't think they would do it in children.
right. So believe it or not, so getting back to the previous question, one other thing I just wanted to mention is that if you think about it, it does kind of make sense because kids aren't even on the earth long enough for like it, if you tried to overeat or not exercise yourself into obesity, it would take some time.
Yeah.
And kids are often not even on the earth long enough for that to happen. So that's why like it does somewhat make sense that the external environment isn't as important. But
You
yeah,
see,
so bariatric surgery, believe it or not, I've been doing bariatric surgery in kids for 20 years. And when I first started doing it, there were lots of people who actually called me a monster, called me all kinds of names. But I tried to explain to them that the science behind the disease of obesity in children was already showing even 20 years ago that diet and exercise weren't enough for these kids. So there have been hundreds of studies in the medical literature that showed that diet and exercise, whether it be for adults or kids, generally those programs can generate about, let's say, 5 to 7% of total body weight loss. So if you weigh 300 pounds, 1% would be, I guess, 3 pounds. So 7% would be 21 pounds. So after a 6-month exercise program, you'd still weigh 280. And that's just not going to treat obesity in most people who weigh 300.
no.
So, and 20 years ago, there were no medications like the GLP-1 medications that are out now. So I was facing these kids in my office who had diabetes, let's say 14 or 15, or sleep apnea or some other medical complication of their obesity. And there were no medications that were available to treat them. And I knew that surgery had been shown to be effective in adults with obesity. And there wasn't really any medical reason that I could come up with why that same surgery wouldn't work in a 15-year-old versus a 20-year-old. So we started doing them. And, it was a very intense research effort. Like I didn't do this willy-nilly. I actually prepped the kids for 6 months before surgery and whole program about diet and exercise and mental health and all those other components that have been shown to be so important. And then we tracked our outcomes and published our outcomes, and we were able to show that the kids did as well, if not better, than adults with the same surgery. And sort of at the same time, there was a group led by a surgeon named Tom Inge, who at that time was in Cincinnati, where he was actually doing the same thing through the NIH. And so both of us were doing basically the same thing, him in a larger group with different centers, and then me as a solo guy. And he showed the same thing. And now his data are even showing that 10 and 15 years after surgery, kids still get a health benefit, even if they've gained a little bit of their weight back, they still have a huge health benefit that persists. So it was crazy. People thought we were crazy at the time, but now it's starting to become more and more acceptable.
Yeah, it takes a long time for people to accept something that's new like that.
Yeah, I think one of the pediatric bariatric surgeons, who's a friend and a colleague, he sent around a manuscript about implementation science that shows that it takes at least 10 years after you prove that something is, let's say, medically beneficial. It takes at least 10 years for that proof to be translated into actual practice, because as you can imagine, people's ideas are so ingrained in their head, and then you're telling them something that's totally new and different, and they just don't want to necessarily either believe it or adopt it. So that study showed it takes like 10 years at least. So it's been a long fight, but we're trying our best.
Well, I don't think you're trying. I think you're doing.
Well, I hope so. I mean, that's the idea, is to change the way people think about the disease in general. And in adults, it's a somewhat more complicated disease, because you do have patients or people who have, let's say, food addiction, or who have, more emotional eating, or other issues that may drive their obesity. And for that reason, some people consider childhood obesity almost a purer form of the disease, because the kids are younger and generally haven't been exposed to all these other sort of confounding issues. But the reality is that, people still think obesity is a lifestyle choice, which it's not. It's a disease, and it's a disease that requires treatment, and sometimes requires aggressive treatment, sometimes requires lifelong treatment. So slowly just trying to change people's perception, and trying to get folks to understand, and frankly be more compassionate to their fellow humans who are suffering from that disease.
Yeah.
But also, if you're listening and have issues with your weight, to know that it's not your fault, and that you should hopefully be able to find someone who can give you some guidance and compassionate care, and point you in a direction that can help.
First thing is convince them. Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Before I retired, I was a drug and alcohol counselor. And to convince them sometimes that you're not God. Other issues are there that caused your habit to drinking. It's not a habit, it's a disease. And to convince them it was a disease took half the treatment time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. The first person that needs to be convinced is the person themselves, right? There's so much self-blame and self-shame that goes into obesity, but also, as you were talking about, alcoholism. And I actually like to make that analogy to alcoholism, because, as you well know, as a drug and alcohol counselor, it used to be considered a disease of the weak-willed. Like, if you had alcoholism, it was just because you couldn't help yourself, and you were tempted by the bottle, and you just, you weren't mentally strong, or whatever the conventional wisdom of the day was. But then once it was shown that it was actually an inheritable disease, it took a lot of the blame off the patients, and people really realized that this was a medical disease that required both prevention. So if you had parents with alcoholism, you knew you were likely to have that same issue, so you should try to prevent it before it happens. But then if it does happen to you, addiction does happen to you, there are ways to treat it. And so the same thing has been sort of a mantra for me with obesity is like, it's something you probably inherited from your parents, at least to a degree, and we should try to prevent it if we know you're high risk. But if we can't prevent it, there are treatment options, and we can pursue those. And so, you know, unfortunately, obesity stigma and bias is still really pervasive in today's society. Um, so that's another hurdle to try to clear. But getting back to your point, it is just trying to convince first the person, and then if you're talking about kids, it's often their parents, and
Yeah,
then try to convince their providers that, refer them for care or to provide that care.
right. I agree with you. You got a lot of people to convince, and it took them many, many years with alcohol to get them another chemical diseases, cocaine, all these other things that it's a disease, and just like any other disease, you got to treat it.
Yep.
And it
That's
is
one of my
very
taglines is that obesity is a disease and not a lifestyle choice. I
right.
repeat that over and over and over again.
Keep saying I'm going to put it, probably use it as the aim. But
Yeah, I mean, because it comes down, it's as simple as that. And again, let's say you could just replace obesity with drug and alcohol addiction.
yeah,
Drug and alcohol addiction is a disease, not a lifestyle choice. It's the same thing. But for whatever reason, and I don't actually know how many years it took in the drug and alcohol community to really get that point hammered home. But it's taken a while in the obesity community, that's for sure.
and in addiction, it took about 25 years from the time Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson got together. It took about 20 years for them to convince the world that it's a disease. They still have people who don't believe it.
Yep. Oh, yeah, for sure. Even today.
Yeah,
And I know that in my personal experience, like my YouTube channel, there are most of the comments I get are all negative. Like nobody there are a few positive comments. There are lots of likes, but the only real comments I get are people who just will not believe or will not agree that obesity is a disease. And they say stuff that has been medically proven to be untrue, but
that's
as you know, most people are getting their medical information from the internet and don't even trust the healthcare leadership anymore. So that's another whole topic and another fight
yeah,
that
like
we
living in Superman.
yeah,
Because what you find on the internet is so bad. It's so
yeah.
wrong, for the most part. Uh,
That's the tough thing is, so one of the reasons I'm doing this is I'm trying to I like to call myself almost a de-influencer. Like I want to go on the internet and post about just scientific findings or truths or facts or whatever you want to call them, and then let people interpret them. Um, but even when that happens, there's even mistrust in sort of like the science that's out there now. So it's like, it's a fight every day. It's a fight. Like, I can't convince people that the science is legit other than by saying the science is legit. Like I've looked at the methods and I've looked at how it's done and it's good science and you should believe it. But I'll get back, well, the pharmaceutical companies paid for it, or, what was the conflict of interest of the investigators or whatever. And I'm just like, that's how, it's impossible to please everybody.
it is. I agree with you on that. And if you did it and got X results, somebody totally unconnected to you did it and got the same results. That's got to mean it's pretty accurate.
One would think that that would be the conclusion, but other people's conclusion would be like, that my studies and the studies done by my colleague were all influenced by the surgical stapler companies or whatever, take your pick of who the conspiracy theorists want to blame, but they'll find a reason that you can't disprove because if there's no proof or disproof, and then they'll hang their hat on that and they'll just, unfortunately, and it's not just with medicine, it's with like so much
Oh
that's going on
yeah.
in the world today. People have their opinions, and whether those opinions are based on any facts behind them or not is sort of irrelevant to many. But
Yeah,
that's another,
facts don't matter anymore.
right. And that's another, again, a much bigger and deeper topic than today's topic. But um,
Yeah, you don't want to. You got your opinions. People that have their opinions, and that's what the facts are. That's their opinion, no matter how
right,
far off base they are.
right,
I run into this even all the time in my shows with people saying, "Well, that's my opinion." I go, "Yeah, and your opinion is about 180 degrees off center."
yeah. Well, again, I actually am trying to really, I'm trying to be as sort of unbiased and just tell people data to try to take that piece of the opinion out of it. Like, you know, you can think bariatric surgery for kids is right or wrong. I don't care whether you think it's right or wrong, but here are the results for people who undergo it. They get healthier. They have remission of their diabetes. They have 10 and 15-year outcomes that show that the surgery lasts and the health benefits last. And you can still have your opinion that it's wrong, but these are what the facts are, the data show. So the people who want to get it or think it's right should be able to get it.
Right.
You don't have to get it if you think it's wrong. You don't have to recommend it or whatever,
Right.
but don't keep others from having access to it based on your opinion when the science or the facts show that it works.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that, Evan. That don't because you don't believe that doesn't mean other people don't and want it and need
Right.
it.
Right. And I don't, I mean, I'd like to change your opinion and have you have an open mind,
Yeah,
but I don't, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I mean, that's part of the American way. You can be pro any concept or against any concept, whether the
yeah,
facts support it or not. But at least in my opinion, everybody's entitled to their own feelings. Just don't subject your feelings on a topic to someone else. Like let them make their own decision. So if they make their decision that is good for them, don't chastise them for that or judge them for that. Just let them be. Let them make their own decision, and you can make your own decision. And everybody can live happily ever after, maybe.
I had a roommate that was you were saying the guy was 300 pounds and he was, and he was a heavy pot user and didn't eat right, had diabetes on dialysis. I talked to him on a couple of occasions, and he got really irate about it. He says, "My weight, I want to stick with it. I'm living my life the way I want to."
Which is totally fair too, right? So people often ask me about the fit at any size movement, like the people who say that we're treating too much obesity and that we should just let people live. And my response is always, that is great for those people if that's what they want to do, and they want to just, try to make themselves as metabolically healthy as possible with diet and exercise, or not. If they just want to live their lives and not worry about their health, that's totally their prerogative.
Mhm.
But don't, as a movement, then again, sort of shame or blame the folks who want to get treatment for their obesity and want to get healthier. Like, don't tell them that they're wrong because they're following the science and getting help and getting healthier. Just, you know, let them make their choice and you make your choice. And again, we don't have to agree on the choice, but I would like to think that we could all agree on everybody having a choice to do what they want to do in terms of what they
Yeah.
think is best for them.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. Everybody has their own opinions and their own choices. And if you've got a friend that's obese and is considering very active, I think encouragement if you can.
Yeah,
Oh,
you want to be supportive of people in their choices, especially if it's a choice to try to improve their health. Like, why wouldn't you be supportive of that?
yeah,
Whether it's a friend or a family member or a person at work or whatever.
yeah,
I just think, unfortunately, I mean, the way our society is today, there's so much just negativity. And I'm not a big like mindfulness or spiritual person or any of that stuff. But I am just kind of like, why do we have to be so negative all the time about everything? Like, why can't we just like let people do what they want to do and just again, I'm not gonna if you don't want to get treatment for your health, that's your choice. I may not agree with your choice, but I'm not going to, you know, call you names or make you feel less of a person because of that choice.
No,
I just, but similarly, if someone is struggling with their weight and they want to take a GLP-1 medication or they want to get surgery, I don't think anybody should blame them either. I think everybody should just support their choice and help them, succeed in whatever choices they make.
I totally agree with you. Let them make their decisions and their choices and support them in that choice.
Right.
I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, that's the way I feel. And again, even if I don't agree with your choice, I'll probably try to help you in that choice.
Right.
I'd like to think I could. I'm not sure I can always, like it's human nature, so I'm not sure I can always be as supportive if I don't agree with your choice. Like I'm not gonna pretend to be a saint here, but I'd like to think that most of the time I can try to support you in a choice, even if I don't agree with your choice.
Yeah, well, I supported my friend, he was my landlord, and by a coincidence, his name was Dale. But I supported him right up to his funeral.
Right up until what? I'm sorry.
Right up to his funeral, I supported his.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, that's I mean, again, if that was his choice to make him happy, if that's what he wanted to live,
That's it.
that's how he wanted to live, and that's how and I get that. Some people say, I don't really care if I'd live to 70 or 80 or 90. I'd rather just enjoy my time now and do what I want and not think about it.
That was his
Okay.
decision, and I let him make it and supported him right away, right until his grave.
Yeah.
But
So,
it hurt
that's,
me to go to his funeral, but because he
yeah.
was a good friend.
Yeah. Right. But that's what he wanted from you. So you did.
Yep.
So you were a good friend because you did abide by what he wanted from you. You didn't
That's
try
right.
to every day tell him to do something different. You just supported him and you know, up until the final day.
Because
And
I'm also, before I became a therapist, I was a cook, so I cooked for him a lot, and he enjoyed. He had some pretty habits that did
well, I
not.
hope he, I
Hmm?
was gonna say, I hope you cooked healthy for him.
I did my best to cook healthy for him, but he didn't always go for it.
Yeah, well, again, you do the best you can, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can't, yeah, you can't always, can't help everybody.
Nope.
Uh, And then the other saying is what, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, you
Well,
know.
I have a theory on that. You can make him drink.
And how do you do it?
Put a salt lick out there. That'll make
Yeah,
him thirst. See, there's
I
a
guess
way.
that's true.
I think that's a way to get people into treatment. Give them a salt lick.
Yeah. So do most of your listeners know what a salt lick is?
Hmm?
Do most of your listeners know what a salt lick is?
I doubt it. Well, just so they'll know, a salt lick is a big block of salt you give animals in the field so they get the iodine and salt intake for their health,
And then it makes them thirsty.
and it makes them thirsty. You bet. So,
So, the analogy, I guess, would be, can you incentivize people to seek treatment, right?
um,
I mean, that's sort of what you're saying,
right.
which is true. Like, and I think um, there are ways to do that work, and you sometimes have to be creative. But
Mhm.
that's sort of like, there's a whole sort of movement in terms of what's called like meeting patients where they are, or trying to find some common ground. And so sometimes that's what it takes from a provider, is to understand that the person across the table from you may not be ready to accept your opinions or accept your treatment recommendations. So find a way to compromise, find a way to meet in the middle, find a way to connect with them that
Yeah.
might incentivize them to eventually agree with your treatment recommendations, but you can't force it on them.
No, you can't. Post treatment is very prevalent in our country is today, with DUI forced treatment and the drug courts and things like that. And I don't believe that it's entirely effective. But getting them
Yeah.
to come in there on their own is effective, but they're not going to do it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, right, that's human nature. Humans don't like to be told what to do
Yeah.
in general, right? And so when treatment for addiction or obesity is voluntary or is the patient's idea, it tends to be more successful. When it's mandated from a drug and alcohol standpoint, or sometimes in kids, it's one of the things I used to try to make sure when I was offering treatment to kids was whether it was really the kid's idea or whether their parents were sort of forcing them. Like parents didn't like that they had a kid with obesity, so they were bringing them to an appointment that the kid didn't want to be at, and then trying to get the kid to get treatment that the kid didn't really want.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, we didn't find it that often, but occasionally we did. And it's sort of the same thing. Like if it was the kid's idea, like the kids who found me on the internet and then had to convince their parents to let them come see me, those kids almost always did really well because
Yeah.
it was the kid who was motivated to come get treatment.
Yeah. Self-motivation.
Right. And when it was the other way around, where they were being seen by, let's say, maybe not even the other way around, but let's say they were in a medical practice somewhere and the pediatrician was the one who suggested they come see me, that wasn't always as, they weren't always as receptive, certainly, and certainly not as receptive early on. So I spent a lot of time trying to really get to know my kids that I was taking care of and really try to figure out where they were at in terms of, what they wanted from their treatment, what they were, hoping to gain, whether it be
Yeah.
health, because most Americans don't care about their health, but certainly most teenagers aren't really thinking about cardiovascular disease or diabetes when they're 40, like they care about tomorrow.
No,
So,
I
I was always
agree.
trying to figure out what best way to connect with them and really help them meet their goals while also still making it clear to them that this was a procedure that was going to benefit their health in the long term.
But that's the problem. You got to convince them that 20 years from now it's going to be just as beneficial as that now. And that's the problem. That's what it was with alcoholism. You got to convince them that it's going to be just as good 20 years from now as it is now. And in fact, it's probably going to be better. Well, in my own life, I can say it got better.
Yeah.
I'm an alcoholic, but I got 36 years sober too.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's again, it's a reason the two diseases are somewhat similar is
Yeah.
that they're both lifelong diseases. They're both diseases that often require treatment forever. Yes, you're 36 years sober, and congratulations for that because it's a great achievement. But there are lots of people who have relapses, and again, the relapsing has to be clear that that's not the person's fault because they relapsed. It's part of the disease. Like the disease is that people relapse for many. And with obesity, they have weight regain, and it's the same thing. Like, don't beat yourself up if you have weight regain. Just try to get yourself back into treatment. Try to get.
I used to tell my clients who relapse, especially the ones that did it several times, I kept telling them, just put the damn bat down.
Put the what down?
Put down the damn bat.
Oh yeah. Well,
don't beat yourself up.
Right. Yeah. But again, it's sort of easier said than done, right? Like you can tell them that, but they've got to come to grips with the fact that it's not their fault, and that's hard to do, especially.
36 later, I'm still in therapy. I'm still in therapy for disease. It is lifelong. I believe you when you say obesity is a lifelong disease and it needs help. They may need therapy for 36 years. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think.
But I do know I need it.
Yeah. And I think, no. So with obesity, it's an interesting disease, obesity. And similar, I think, with drug and alcohol addiction, although I don't know that field that well. But obesity comes in lots of different shapes and sizes. And we think it's a simple disease because it looks the same to us all on the outside. Like you see someone who's big, you think they have a weight problem. It's not necessarily the hardest thing to diagnose. But what you don't know is how they got there. Did they get there because they had some mental health issues? Did they get there because they were actually, were malnourished and had poverty, and the only thing they could eat was, really food that's terrible for them, and this is a symptom of their socioeconomic status? Or is it, genetic, runs in their family? They have all the money in the world, but they still suffer from obesity because their parents had it and their parents' parents had it, and that's just, unfortunately runs in their family. So you just don't know when you look at someone from the outside. And the mistake people make is that because it looks the same on the outside, they think it can be treated the same or came from the same thing on the inside. And they just think, again, oh, that patient just needs to eat better and exercise more, and then they'll be fine, which unfortunately is not the case for most.
Does abuse play a role in obesity?
For sure. So there's a whole something called adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. And adverse childhood experiences have a much higher likelihood of developing obesity. People who have adverse childhood experiences have a much higher incidence of developing obesity, both as a child or as an adult. And one of those adverse childhood experiences is abuse, whether it be physical or sexual or mental. They all increase the risk of developing obesity. And obesity it's sort of it has a double or a bidirectional relationship with mental health. So people who have mental health issues have a higher incidence of obesity, but then people with obesity have a higher incidence of mental health issues. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that was my specialty, was dual diagnosis.
Yeah. And again, it's complicated, and and they're interconnected, right? You can't, so that was actually another sort of thing we learned along the way, was that if you have a patient with obesity and with a mental health issue, the sort of old school way of thinking about it was, well, let's get the mental health issue under control and then we'll deal with the obesity. But it turns out that it's much more effective if you deal with both at the same time.
Yep, that's where what we found out about addiction.
Right. And it's somewhat, I don't know if I want to use the word frustrating or unfortunate, let's say, use that word.
Yeah.
That we keep making the same mistakes over and over in the medical world. Like, if you guys figured that out in addiction, why did we have to figure it out on our own for obesity? Like, why couldn't we just say, okay, well, if that worked for addiction, why couldn't we should just do that with obesity? But still now, we're fighting, the eating disorder community and the mental health communities are fighting with the obesity treatment communities, because they say that, obesity treatment causes eating disorders, and it's actually, the data show the opposite. But if you have an eating disorder and you have obesity, treating them both, again, is like the way to go. Like it's more effective than just treating the eating disorder first and then dealing with the obesity. It's like
I noticed a major failure in people who tried with the addiction, just to, okay, I'll stop drinking and then I'll handle my mental health issues. And I send a large percentage of them, at least 40% anyway, 40% of them fail at stopping drinking. They got to the dual diagnosis type facility that would treat both of them at once.
Yeah. And I think that probably to this day, mental health treatment and mental health support is the most sort of underappreciated and under-resourced type of support that's out there. Like, it's just so hard to get mental health support, and it's hard to convince people they need mental health support. It's hard to explain to people how important it is or how much it is interconnected with their physical health. So unfortunately, there's still such a long way to go when it comes to that kind of thing.
Same thing with the addiction. It's a long way to convince them that, okay, you got a drinking problem. Yes, we know that. We know that's a disease. You also have a mental health issue, which is a disease. You got to convince them that it's not something separate, that it is a disease, because it is.
Yeah, no, it's for sure. It's for sure true. And you can't separate mental health and physical health, really. They're two are really connected.
They're so connected that,
100%.
yeah. And it's hard to do, but it's worthwhile. I can see how you, and I got a sneaking suspicion it's probably a little more difficult for you than it would be for me because of the way the two diseases work.
Well, I mean, I guess I think that what's one of the unique things about childhood obesity and caring for patients with childhood obesity is the family component, right? So if you're a 40-year-old struggling with obesity, you might have a husband, you might have kids, but or you might be male and have a wife and have kids, because it does affect both genders or both sexes. But it's not necessarily, your treatment is really about you as an individual, and then and your family sort of secondary. But with kids, it's really a whole family issue. And sometimes we see kids with obesity where the kid wants to make changes, let's say stop drinking sugar sweetened Coke or whatever.
Yeah.
But the parents will be like, well, I like Coke and I don't want to keep it out of the house just because my kid doesn't like it. Or sometimes they would say, but what about the other kids in the family? They want Coke and I don't want to deprive them of Coke just because my one kid can't have it. And so, again, as a provider, I kind of be like, really? That's like a sacrifice you're not willing to make for your family member. But okay, if you can't give up your Coke, just keep it out of the house. And when you go to work, get your Coke. Like, just don't do it in front of your child who can't drink Coke. Like, and the other kids in the house, again, same thing. When they go to their birthday parties, let them drink whatever Coke they want. Just not in the house with the one kid who can't drink Coke. And it's sort of a simplistic example, but that was something we dealt with quite a bit, where the family wasn't necessarily all on board in the beginning, and we had to work hard to get the whole family together and understand that this
Oh
is
yeah, that could be something I never dealt with anything quite that way. I
yeah,
didn't do it. I was not a family therapist. I didn't do the family. I let other people handle that. And I didn't do children because I just couldn't do it.
yeah,
So I did adults only.
yeah. But that, again, that's sort of like a difference. Everything's got its own sort of niches and
Yeah.
unique aspects to it. But it is you cannot, I mean, I had patients where really the best thing for them was when they went to college and got out on their own and were able to manage their own health independently of the rest of the family, because the family wasn't that supportive and they just needed to get out from that roof and get into their own situation. So it's
Yeah.
still, it's different in every person's different,
Yeah.
and
Oh, definitely.
you have to approach their care differently.
You do.
And you never really know until you start to talk to people what those unique differences might be.
You've got to get to know your client before you can treat them.
I agree with that.
Before I put them into a group, I'd probably spend 1 or 2 sessions of individual therapy with them before I put them into a group. Then I'd put them into a group that they would fit into, not just because I have space in this group, you're going over here. Or I don't have, no, I'd put them in a group where they fit.
Yep.
I think you probably did the same thing.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because group therapy for weight management hasn't really been as effective as one might think. And it's more utilized in adults than it is in teenagers. And we tried to run group programs, but part of the issues was that, we have to get consent of the parents, and then a lot of the parents would have to, this was sort of pre-COVID when everything was in person, and you'd ask to have a group in person, let's say at the hospital or whatever, and it would be like, not only the kid would have to get there, but all the parents would have to get there, and it just logistically was not well thought of.
Yeah.
And so I think telemedicine has really helped with a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I don't know I'm sure there are data out there about group therapy in person versus group therapy in using telemedicine. And I don't know what those data would show. But at least in my experience with individuals, there are still some pros and cons to not being in the room with someone when you're treating them. Like obviously it's more convenient, but sometimes there is an added benefit to being there in person. Like, let's say maybe empathy may not come across as well over Zoom as it might in person.
Well, that and body language doesn't show up as well in telehealth.
Right.
You can't see the whole body, and you get and it's your voice is modified through the microphones and the feedback. I firmly believe in one-on-one individual together. I do telehealth, but I'm not a big fan of it.
Yeah. The issue in in both mental health and in obesity is the access to care, the access to actual like brick and mortar places is the problem. And so telehealth does help fill that void.
It does.
And then there's, people who live in rural communities who would have to drive, hour, 2 hours to get to a place.
Yeah.
So I think that, just like anything else in medicine, it's evolving and we're still figuring out how to best utilize it and how to sort of mitigate the negatives and accentuate the positives. But it's still a work in progress or in process a bit. But, I just started a pediatric weight management telemedicine practice because the access to care for kids with obesity is even worse than the access to care for adults with obesity. So they're really desperate. And this was one way to try to help address that that shortage. And we'll see. I don't know if it's going to be as effective, but we're trying it and we're piloting it and we'll look at our outcomes and then adjust accordingly.
Okay, I see. We're running short on minutes here, Evan. What's the one thing that we've talked about or we haven't talked about that we should have?
Well, I would say so. I gave you my first tagline, which is obesity is a disease and not a lifestyle choice. I think my second tagline, which is a little bit more complicated, is that, and I alluded to it earlier, but I want to say it again. I want to stress it again. So, which is that obesity is what's called a phenotype, which is a fancy medical word. Sorry, obesity is what's called a phenotype. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
Okay. Obesity is what's called a phenotype, which is a fancy medical word for the way things look on the outside. But it comes from multiple different genotypes, which I'm using here figuratively, not literally, and that means it just comes from a bunch of different pathways. And so what I want people to sort of understand is just because it all looks the same on the outside, obesity looks the same on the outside, it doesn't mean that it's from the same reason on the inside. And thus, you shouldn't tell people your opinion about what they should do to treat it or how to fix it. And even if you struggled from obesity yourself and were able to find a way to get your health improved, that doesn't even necessarily mean what worked for you would work for somebody else. So it sort of goes back to that kind of common humanity thing, which is like, support people with obesity. Don't necessarily tell them what to do or what not to do. Just help support them make choices that will be potentially helpful for their health, whether that be eating better or exercising more or going to see a provider or whatever. But if we could just put all the shame and blame and hate on the back burner and just, sort of get rid of that, even that step alone would make things significantly better for people who suffer from the disease.
I think you're 100% correct. I put that thing on the back burner, way on the back burner, and it goes for both of them. But Evan, I want to thank you very much for being here. This has been incredibly interesting. It's been a very short hour. It went by awful fast because I'm just so fascinated by what you talked about. I'm glad I had you on. I'm going to stop the recording now. Don't hang up.
Okay, well, it's been my pleasure being.
Thank you for listening to the show. There are show notes and a place to comment at https://coffee-time-again.libsyn.com/website. He hopes that you liked what you heard and will tell others about him. Dale is attempting to get a following that both disagrees and agrees with him. He does not want yes men. If you disagree, wonderful. He is happy to have you here as a part of the Coffee Time Again team. Dale does not talk about the news of the day. He is attempting to give a history lesson that is just as important about what is going on in the headlines of today. Please do not hesitate to contact him. Just remember that Dale wants a clean show, meaning no cussing, name calling, yelling, or hate allowed. You can disagree with him and not be disagreeable about it. Support him and help keep this alive. https colon / glow.fm / coffee dash time dash again.